The Fisherman was published in 2015. I began writing it around 2011. Um, and in fact, what drew me to write that novel, I was working on a different book at the time, one that I thought was going to be my first novel. However, I had moved from Nigeria to Cyprus, which is a small island between Greece and Turkey. Um, and so I was having my education there, my college education, and so I had come to understand that my family, which for a long time, as I said, I was actually embarrassed growing up by the number of children that we had because people always say this thing that Africans have a lot of kids. I think that it's never been my experience. It may be I suppose it's East Africa and other places, but in Nigeria, I didn't know any other family that had more than five kids. And in fact, as I said, the government thought that was too many even. I was trying to curtail it. So while growing up, people used to mock us. They would call us a soccer team with a reserve, because we're 12, so, and I write about this in The Fisherman as well. So anyway, long story short, I was very embarrassed by my siblings. But when I went to Cyprus, I realized that I had actually been so close to them that I did not have a friend. That shocked me because everybody is like, I'm going to call my friend here. I'm going to call. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have a friend. There was just so many people that after school, you had so many people to play with. It never occurred to me that I could have a friend. Of course, there were acquaintances at school, but my siblings were actually the closest to me. So it gave me a new sort of perspective on my siblings in the aftermath of leaving them, of departing, in fact, not just from them, but from the country. So while in Cyprus, I was thinking about this thing when one day my dad called me, and it was a normal call, but he just mentioned something in passing. He said, your two brothers, oldest brothers, are now best friends. They are about to go on a trip together. So maybe you should say hi to them. And that was where the idea of the novel came from. Because when we were growing up, these two people were enemies. They never saw eye to eye. But now in their 30s, they'd become best friends. So almost immediately after I dropped the call, I had this vision of four brothers, of a unit of siblings. And I began to just think, what is it that can come in and break that bond? So that was it. So I began to toy with a couple ideas, and I came up with the idea of a prophecy. You know, so essentially, the story of the novel is that there's four brothers from this Nigerian middle class family. Who they go about their daily life. They go to school every day until one day they encounter this guy who is a vagrant. He's like a homeless guy. He walks about, but what is unique about him is that he has the ability to predict the future. And there's a track record of just the prophecies he's given coming to pass. So he encounters these boys and makes a prophecy. So that changes the equation of things and their life is turned around. So that's really the premise of the novel. And that's where it came from. I just wanted to explore what is it that can break this bond of siblings. I toyed with a lot of ideas. What if they were grown-ups and they all loved the same woman? And then I thought, oh, that has been done to death. Legend of the Fall, for instance. So that's even cliche. Then I thought about other things, but then I came up almost by happenstance. I think I went back to Nigeria, on holiday, and a lot of things were happening, and I began to hear of people who would say things about the future and all of that. So that was, I think, where the idea for the prophecy came from. And, every other thing was easy because, I grew up in that particular town. is a town that was filled with a lot of superstition. When I was growing up, there was a time when we would hear stuff like it's actually a river that crisscrosses the place. It's almost what would be the equivalence? Maybe the Bronx, and that river thing. Yeah, and there was a time when people would say that there's a mermaid in there. Nobody should go there. That someone had an encounter. It's almost like the Lost Nest thing in America, in American folklore. Yeah. So we had stuff like that. So it was always a fascinating place. So I just thought, if I send the children there in the novel, they will be able to engage with the supernatural, which is a dimension that I'm actually very interested. The mystical, is an element that I'm very interested in exploring in my work. So that's one of the things that informed. But also, I was thinking of Nigeria as a political entity, a unit that has been abused, by its own leaders, by its citizenry, but also by its creators, the British, whose idea it was, who came and made up this contraption and almost prophetically says this is how your life should be going forward. And that has had implications for millions of people across generations.